Hello and welcome to today's Daf Yomi, Daf 62 Omid B of Nazir. Let's dive straight in. Chumma Vadim, Lunashim Shehu Mefer Nidre Ishto Ve'enim Mefer Nidre Avdo. Hefer Le'ishto, Hefer Olamis, Hefer Le'avdo, Yata Le'cheus Umashlim B'ziruso. The previous Mishnah taught that the Nazirite of women includes a stringency that does not apply to slaves. The Mishnah adds there is a greater stringency in the case of slaves. What does that mean? The commentators state that this Mishnah can be explained in two ways. It is possible that its second part serves to explain the first statement. A husband can nullify his wife's vows so that they no longer exist, even if she later leaves her jurisdiction. In the case of a slave, however, the fact that a master can force a slave to break his vow does not mean he has nullified it. He's merely suspended its observance temporarily. Consequently, if the slave is emancipated, he must fulfill his vow. According to this interpretation, the Mishnah repeats some information, at least with regard to a wife. Alternatively, one can explain when the first part of the Mishnah is not referring to nazirship after the wife or slave leaves his jurisdiction, but while they are still under his authority. If so, the Mishnah is teaching that a husband cannot reinstate his wife's nazirship after he has nullified it. Whereas in the case of a slave, the master can always stop requiring the slave to violate his nazirship, which would again render the slave obligated to nazirship, says the Rosh. Then in the case of women, as a man can nullify the vows of his wife, a father can nullify the vows of his daughter, and a husband can nullify those of his wife, including vows of nazirship. Rama Sefer Flach Hechan and Dolan 12:1 Hechan Nazir 2:17 Shochan Yodeh 24:2-37, but cannot nullify the vows of his slave. A master cannot nullify the vows of his slave, and that's the Rama Sefer Flach Hechan Nazir 2:17-18, despite the fact that he can prevent him from fulfilling them in practice. Similarly, if he nullified the nazirship of his wife, it is permanently nullified. The husband can nullify vows of affliction taken by his wife. If he does so, they are permanently nullified, and she does not have to observe them even after she's left his jurisdiction. By contrast, while he can also nullify those vows of his wife that impinge on their personal relationship, such as vows are nullified only for the duration of their marriage. Rama Sefer Flach Hechan Nazir 12:2-3 Shochan Yodeh 2:34-55. And it remains nullified even if she is later divorced or widowed. Conversely, if he nullified the nazirship of a slave by forcing him to violate the terms of his vow of nazirship, when the slave is emancipated, he completes his nazirship. According to the Rambam, if a slave took a vow of nazirship and his master said to him, "It is nullified for you," the slave is emancipated and must complete his nazirship. However, the Ravid maintains that the declaration itself does not emancipate the slave, and he must complete his vow in the event that he does not gain his freedom. Rama Sefer Flach Hechan Nazir 2:18 and Keter Mishnah and Sefer Kinyan for the volume 8:17 Shochan Yodeh 2:67-72. The sages taught in Tosefta 6:4. With regard to what matter can his master force a slave? With regard to nazirship. However, he cannot force a slave in the case of other vows and violations. This Brisa is apparently saying that a master cannot prevent a slave from fulfilling the terms of a vow. The Gemara asks, what is different with regard to a Nazirite? That a master can force a slave to transgress his Nazirite, as the merciful one states, to bind his soul with a bond, Numbers 33, from which it is inferred that the Torah is referring only to one whose soul is in his possession, and not to one who is owned by another. This excludes a slave whose soul is not in his possession because he is under his master's control. If so, then even with regard to vows, that the same halacha should apply as well, as that verse is written in the context of vows in general, not specifically vows of nazirship. Why is the master unable to compel his slave to break a vow? Rav Sheshes said, what are we dealing with? What are we dealing here? With a case where a cluster of grapes was placed before the slave, and he vowed not to benefit from it. With regard to vows, when he is prohibited from eating this cluster, he is not considered prohibited from eating others. Therefore, the master cannot force him to eat it, as he has no reason to insist that the slave consume this particular cluster of grapes. No, Matzeka Pele. Likewise, a husband cannot nullify a vow of this kind uttered by his wife, and is not in the category of other afflictions in Don 79a. She could eat some other cluster of grapes, commentary on Nazir. To eat it, as he has no other reason to insist that the slave consumes a cluster of grapes. By contrast, with regard to Nazirship, when he is prohibited from eating this cluster, he is rendered prohibited from consuming all others. Therefore, the master can force him to eat. This is because the lack of food weakens the slave, who is the property of his master. The Gemara asks, and with regard to vows, are we not dealing even with a situation where he has only this cluster before him and vows not to eat it? In which case, if he does not eat it, he is weakened. Why can't the master compel him to eat the grapes in this case? Rather, Rava said that the difference between the vows of Nazirship and other vows concerns a case when there was a grape seed, which provides only negligible nourishment, that was placed before the slave and he vowed not to eat it. With regard to vows concerning which he is prohibited to eat only this one seed, the master cannot force him to eat it, as refrain from eating grapes he will not weaken him. With regard to Nazirite, he is prohibited from consuming other grape products as well, the master can force him. The Gemara again asks, with regard to vows, are we not dealing even with a situation where he only has this grape seed in front of him, in which case, if he does not eat it, he would be weakened? Why then can the master compel him to violate another vow, but not a regular vow? Rather, Abai said that the Brisa does not, in fact, in this case, is in which a master can compel a slave to violate his vow, but rather means the following. With regard to what situation is a master who wants to negate his slave's vow required to force the slave to violate his vow by stating explicitly that he does not want him to fulfill it? It is a case of a vow of Nazirship. If a slave took a vow of Nazirship, his master may force him to drink wine or become impure to bear a corpse, and his vow is thereby negated. If the slave uttered any other vow of affliction or took a vow that would come to neglect his work, or if he vowed to give the vow of another, the master does not have to compel him to violate his terms. The reason is that vows of this kind are automatically cancelled. We say, Nazir 2:17-18, but he is not required to force him in the case of other vows. The vows and oaths of a slave do not go into effect at all, and his master need not even register an objection. Touch would maintain that the Brisa does not include valuations because a master cannot in fact cancel them. The reason is that whether the slave owns the money now or intends to pay it after his release, the master loses nothing by his valuations. The committee on Nazir. The early committee discussed why there should be any difference between Nazirship and other vows. In light of the fact that the verses that serve as the basis for this halacha speak of vows in general, some contend that Nazirship is a especially powerful vow, and is effective even with regard to matters that are not optional. For example, if one takes an oath to drink wine, then might obligate himself to do so, and then takes the vow of Nazirship, the vow of Nazirship overrides the oath. Consequently, Nazirship takes effect even for a slave, unless the master objects. Tosfot. The early commentators also point out that vows and oaths of a slave are automatically cancelled only if they are vows of affliction or lead him to neglect his work. A master may not compel his slave to neglect any other kind of vow. But he is not required to force him in the case of other vows. If a slave takes an oath, his master may not force him to transgress it, as the oath is automatically nullified. Rambam says, Shavuot 12:6, and he is not required to force him in the case of an oath, and these do not take effect at all. What is the reason for this? It is as the verse states with regard to oath, or if anyone swear clearly with his lips to do evil or to do good, Leviticus 5:4, just as the good mentioned in this verse is referring to a voluntary action, so to the evil is voluntary, e.g. if he takes an oath not to derive benefit from an item. This excludes a slave whose oath or vow would cause evil to others, as it is not in his power to affect his master adversely. Therefore, his statement is invalid. Here too, as the owner will suffer if his slave's diet is restricted, a slave may not accept a vow or an oath upon himself. In a case where a slave took a vow of Nazirship, but was prevented by his master from fulfilling the term of his vow, the sage engaged in dispute what the halacha would be if he permanently left his master's presence. Avad neder Panaf. If a slave took a vow of Nazir and permanently left his master's presence, it's prohibited of him to drink wine, so that his discomfort will cause him to return to his master. The halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but the Bible disagrees in keeping with the principle that the halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef in dispute with Rabbi Meir. And the Rambam says, Nazir 2:19, he ran away without being emancipated. Rabbi Meir says he may not drink wine. Since the slave is free in practice, his vow goes into effect. And Rabbi Yosef says he may drink wine, as he's not emancipated. The Gemara suggests, shall we say that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi disagree with regard to the following statement of Shmuel? Shmuel said, with regard to one who renounces the ownership of a slave, Hamavkid Avdo. One who renounces ownership of a slave has emancipated him, but the slave requires a bill of manumission before he can marry a Jew. The halacha, according to the opinion of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, Tractate Gittin 39a, and not in according to the opinion of Shmuel. And that's from the Rambam Sefer Kin Hechet Avodim 8:13, Shulchan Aruch Yodei 267-64. The slave is emancipated and not required by a manumission. The halacha indicates that if a slave is free in practice, he no longer requires a bill of manumission, but automatically considered a free man. The Gemara asks, if so, should one say that Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that the ruling is according to the opinion of Shmuel, and therefore the slave is obligated in Nazirship as soon as he runs away, like any other free slave? And Yosef, the opinion ruling is not according to the opinion of Shmuel. The Gemara rejects this suggestion. No, it is possible that everyone is of the opinion that the ruling is according to the opinion of Shmuel, while the mission is referring to a case when the master refused to declare the runaway ownerless, or was intent on recovering him. Consequently, the slave is not in fact a free man at all, and the Tanaim disagree with regard to the following. Rabbi Yosef says that one who says that he may drink wine maintains that the slave will ultimately return and will come back to his master, and therefore it's preferable to drink wine so he will not be weakened by the time he returns. According to Rabbi Meir, the one who says that he may not drink, he maintains that his breath of the slave should suffer by being deprived of wine, so that he will return to his master as a desire to allow a sperm to return. That's the end of the Omen. Thank you for listening. Wish you a good Shabbos and peace in Israel. Take care. All the best. Bye.